My name is Dwayne Stovall. I'm from right over here, not far from you, Cleveland, Texas. I live just outside of Cleveland. I'm on the school board at Tarkington Independent School District. I'm just a small business owner in Liberty County. I have 3 children, been married 22 years. My high school sweetheart, pretty average Texan, other than the fact that I'm a native Texan, which is pretty special. About 7 years ago, I started studying the Constitution, studying the framers, the founders, the ratification debates, coming forward with that. I wanted to know what the Constitution created. That almost immediately turned a light on that what we were gifted with by the framers and the states that agreed to it is not what we live under today. And the reason I'm running for United States Senate is because that is the one position that I found out early on has been the most misused and abused position at the federal level. It is supposed to be what George Mason called the mechanism of self-defense with the states, and it is not. Up until Ted Cruz, we haven't really had anybody standing on principle that would protect the states, or the state of Texas. I'd like to see it go back to that original founding principle.
You know, a lot of people say Washington's broken. Why do you want to go to a broken Washington, and do you think it's fixable?
I would say that I don't know that it's fixable. I think that it's going to get fixed. I don't know how much control we're going to have over fixing it. There's two mindsets here. We're either going to do the old adage of we'll just elect enough of our guys to get in there and we'll fix it. That hasn't worked so well in the last century. The other adage is that, or the viewpoint is that there will be a correction. It's going to be economic. And when the government gets corrected because we've devalued the dollar to the point where we can't sustain it, we have so much debt we can't sustain it, and we have this, it's going to be a global correction. We'll be faced with having to deal with all these issues immediately. And I would rather try to control it and protect the state of Texas while I'm doing it than to let it just crawl all over us and collapse around our necks, you know.
What experiences do you have that make you believe you're prepared for, if you go to Washington, the inevitable onslaught of lobbyists, opposition, and legislative procedure?
For me, it's really simple. I don't know about anybody else. I'm a Christian. My faith guides my moral principles. If you have that, and I think it helps a lot, I think you need that. If your context of character has everything to do with going to Washington, I understand the role. I understand that it is to protect the best interest of Texas in the long term. I understand that if you go there and that is your role and that is your guiding principle, you don't create those alliances and relationships with outside forces. It's a very clear set of duties. You actually only represent the state legislature of Texas and the state as a whole. That's why it was separate from the House of Representatives, who are the people's house. For me, I think if you have an undying loyalty to your state, and I do, then it should come easily. There shouldn't be any way to be corrupted that way.
You've talked about representing the state, and you know, I understand that's more of a pre-17th Amendment
originalist.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how, considering we're in a post-17th Amendment world, how do you figure out the best way to balance the interests of the people, which seems to be the way the 17th Amendment was implemented, to get it out of the hands of the state legislature, put it in the hands of the people, and also representing the legislature, which may not always...
Your representation of the state as a whole, which is by and large, that is the design of the Senate. You have to take there's really only 3 hurdles you have to cross when you're voting on anything, and that is, does it meet the requirements of the federal Constitution? Does it meet the requirements of the state Constitution? And after that, what are the long-term ramifications to the state of Texas? If they are negative, it is a no. It's a very simple formula. You can't vote or support things or give sanction to things that grow the federal government, to raise the debt on the federal government, that encroach on the states. You just can't. And that's where we're at today because of that 17th Amendment, in large part.
As far as the campaign's going, National Review came out with an article earlier this week that stated that you were told numerous times that your newest opponent, Stu Stockman, would not step in the race. Obviously something isn't right there because he's in the race now. Can you clarify that situation? I mean, is that true? Do you feel like
Steve's my congressman.
Yeah.
Steve's a good guy. I mean, he's a good guy. I mean, he comes with some luggage. There's some things that people can go after him on, but what they're referring to is a couple of weeks before he filed, he and I had breakfast together, and he had alluded to they were leaning on him to get in a race against Cornyn. I asked him, "Are you going to get in?" And he said, "I am not inclined to get in." He didn't say I'm not getting in. He said, "I'm not inclined to." I said, "So if you don't get in, you're going to endorse me?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll endorse you." Well, we laughed it off. I mean, he doesn't have any money. I don't have that kind of money. Talking about Cornyn, excuse me. I mean, he's got more money than you can shake a stick at. It doesn't come from inside of Texas mostly, but we talked about that. I told him that he would do me a big favor if he changed his mind. Just give me a heads up on it, and you know, we'll keep you in the loop, that kind of thing. I actually texted him Tuesday before the filing deadline. What's the word? And he texted me back to tell me it was Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't remember. He texted me back to tell me he had refiled in the house, and that people were giving him grief. And I texted him back and said, "That's okay. You endorse me after you endorse me, we'll get you a support group." But obviously, he had a change of heart, and that's okay.
Two of the things you've said, especially on your website, that you say are set in stone are, quote, "I will never vote to increase the debt," and two, quote, "I will never vote to increase the size and scope of the federal government." Considering there's so much there's seemingly a lot of instability internationally, do those two principles apply during a time of war?
Do they apply during a time of war?
Well, if we were to get involved in Syria, or if we were to get involved with all of the issues that's going on with China, and we've never really had a war that didn't go without debt, would you support debt in the context of war, or is your absolutely never, no more debt?
Let's put this in context of what we actually deal with. If you take all the money it costs to service our debt, and you take all the Department of Health, all the social issues, all the entitlement programs, welfare, you take Social Security, you take the cost of our entire military budget, including Veterans Affairs, take all of those aspects and put them together, they still only equate to about $2.6 trillion, give or take. That, if you put that against the fact that, according to our Treasury, which, you know, depending on whether you can believe our Treasury or not, we took in somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.9 trillion. So even with our military, who we agree to pay for, who we need out there on the front, they're not the issue. Being able to fund the government's core issues, core requirements under the Constitution are not the issue. It's the 2.5 million people, not including the military, by the way, that make up the government largesse that we pay for every day that we can't. What I'm bringing to the table is we're past time for us to have a conversation about divesting this unconstitutional overreach of powers back to the states. We're past it. We've got more duplicitous agencies you can shake a stick at. Texas has a TCEQ. We manage our own industry, we manage our own environmental concerns. We don't need an EPA. We have our own state board. We don't need a federal board of education, neither of which are authorized in the Constitution. So that discussion's got to start somewhere. No, I'm not willing to raise the debt 1 ounce.
Continuing on foreign policy, because that's a big part of a senator's job: treaties, defense, trade agreements, and continuing on the Middle East with the supposed quasi deal with Iran on nuclear power, and the civil war in Syria, the Arab Spring. Israel appears to be becoming more and more adamant about preemptively defending itself. Should we continue supporting Israel against these kind of threats, or and if so, what is the best approach?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. As a Christian, I support Israel, but constitutionally and as a country, as a union of states, we have rules. So if we were to be, speaking on terms of if they were to request our assistance, as with any other ally, there are steps involved. And the Senate's not going to be involved until after a declaration of war has taken place in the Congress. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, the fact that we have presidents who think they can just arbitrarily go to war at any time they feel like it, that's got to be dealt with too. But what it comes down to is you still have to get back to those basic principles of that Constitution. That is that if that occurs, that president has to go to the people's house in Congress and has to make his case. Then the people are supposed to be represented, and their decision is supposed to be represented in that body, and then it will come to the Senate for affirmation. I'm one of those that if the body representative of the people, as long as it does not have a negative effect on Texas, and I'm talking about anything, trade tariffs, you name it, if it comes to the Senate and the people have approved it, I'm inclined to approve it. But there are steps involved. You can't just arbitrarily do these things, you know.
And continuing on foreign policy, because it just seems to be in the news all the time. You know, China is becoming more aggressive as far as its territorial desires.
Economically or militarily?
Well, both.
Economically specifically, yeah.
But there's been a lot of, you know, we've seen a lot more of their naval expansion in the Pacific. You know, they've increased their defense zone, you know, which is encroaching on territories claimed by Japan, the Philippines, and we have treaties with these countries to defend them at any moment. How do we handle China? How do we support our allies feeling threatened?
How do we support our allies being threatened?
Yeah, like Japan, Philippines.
If we're standing by the treaties we have, and we're still in talks with them, for me, it's not the military aspect. I mean, every country has a right to develop whatever it wants to develop on its road. The idea that we all need to coalesce around the nuclear aspect, that's one question all to its own. But economically, we're looking at a bigger disaster than anything anyone could ever imagine. I mean, the fact that we have a global debt bubble that's just the biggest enemy to our future, as it encompasses everything about us. I mean, it's the largest thing on the face of the planet, and we don't deal with that in any way, shape, or form as far as I'm concerned. But it seems like we just tend to grow it. So dealing with China, small thing about me, and this is very small, about 1998 or so I started trading some construction equipment globally, small scale. I've been overseas a few times. I have a little different take on, or a better understanding of economics internationally than I did when I was younger. But what I learned was that there's lots of countries who are working outside the U.S. dollar, and they're working very hard to create trade routes outside the U.S. dollar because we're devaluing our currency so strongly. I think that is the forefront of any kind of military growth or anything. When you start having these devalued currencies and these economies are so unstable, and they're unstable because of the fact that we devalue our currency, we affect everybody else on the planet. So you got this correction, if we'll go back to what we were talking about earlier, that sooner or later somebody's going to have to address this and take it a stronger viewpoint at how we're going to deal with this.
Well, back to the Senate, let's say hypothetically you arrive at the Senate and Democrats are still in control. Still the nuclear option on judicial appointments, cabinet appointments. What would be your primary role as a minority member or a member of a minority in the Senate?
Beyond being able to just voice your opinion on any kind of expansion of government, because we basically understand that for the last 100 years, there's really been no restriction of government. What we have today is an unlimited national government. It can do anything it wants, anytime it wants, with no restriction. Anybody wants to argue that, I think the data pretty well proves that. Once you get beyond the fact that you will always vote in favor of the freedom of the people in your state, the freedom of your state, the not enslaving future generations in chains of debt, any of that stuff, you got to bring discourse back to federalism. That was one of the basic founding principles of that Constitution. We're so far away from that, it's not even funny. That's the principle that the states hold the power. States hold, individual states, it's plural. It's not the United State United State, it's the United States. These unconstitutional growths of that federal government have gotten so large, we have nationalized everything. Everything. We argue over what people in New York are doing that are outside the Constitution. It's none of our business. We don't want them dictating to Texans what we're doing here. The design of the framers is not in play. Federalism has to be brought back forward. And I'm telling you, for the last almost a year now, I'm talking to thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and they totally get it. It takes a second, but a lot of people miss the founding, and what we were all indoctrinated in is nationalism, and you got to bring that back out there. I think if we could start talking about divesting some of that power, yeah, so national security treaties and all that, those are very well defined in the Constitution. Those definitely need to be followed through with. But the expansion of power has gotten so large, it encroaches on everything we do here. And we talked about energy. Texas energy is our energy. There's no reason we should be dictated to by a federal leviathan that tells us what to do here. There's 26 million of us here. We can make the decisions for ourselves.
If you could add, if you could unilaterally add one amendment to the Constitution, whether it's term limits, marriage, pro-life, or balanced budget, or any other, what would you choose it to be?
How about take one away?
Take one away?
Or a couple. 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, take those out, throw them away.
But there's not any you would add?
Other than at this point, I used to not be in favor of a balanced budget amendment, but I think it's needed. I think it's warranted. I think it's time for it. The whole idea that you are, one of the principles of the Constitution was republicanism, and that means you're going to be represented by those you elect. Well, that scale, and scale is a big issue with our republic, that scale that we had at one time is gone. The fact that they had, I think if you look in the Constitution now, it still says 30,000 citizens. The representative was the minimum, and they had a broken down scale early on. Well, today we have over 700,000 citizens to a representative. You're not really represented. So balancing a budget, we don't really control our congressmen. They're not really getting the input. Nobody knows them by name. You have a finite group of people in their district that know who they are personally. It's not the way it was in the beginning. So today you don't really have their ear on budgetary items. But we figured out quite clearly over the last century that the people that do have their ear are the corporatist relationships and the special interests and lobbyists. They drive our budget. So it's whoever's got the most money to spend in Washington is the one driving our growth. And I'm not talking about a good way. I'm talking about that corporatist governmental growth that's not supposed to be there.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. Can you tell us how more people can find out about your campaign?
Sure. If they go to Texans for Stovall, they can go to get involved. They can join. We've got, right now it's, what are we at? Second week of December. We've got a little less than 1,000 volunteers right now, 17 statewide coordinators. We're looking for 2,000 volunteers by the end of December. Our grassroots movement is excellent. They can go to Texans for Stovall and get involved. They can go there, and also we just started today, by the way. We just started a study group that's going to be coming out in January all over the state of Texas. They're going to be 20, 30-minute little get-togethers. They're not Tea Party driven. They're not Youth for Liberty driven. They're not Liberty Group driven. They're not individual driven. It's not driven by my campaign. It's not about the campaign. It's an opportunity for people to get together and go through some lessons over states' rights, 10th Amendment, what we can do as individuals to push back against government encroachment. And it's called Keep Texas Free. And if you go to Texans for Stovall and click on that Keep Texas Free link, it'll take you to learn more about that. That's something I'm real proud of.
All right. Well, I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.